This is World History. In case you forgot what class you are in, it's Chapter 19, European Expansion unto the Uttermost Part of the Earth. Now, students, just so you know, this is the beginning of week 2 of our video series. If you have not taken the Chapter 18 test, if you have not done all the other material for your first week's packet, if you haven't come in and grabbed your second week's packet yet, then make sure you do that before you begin working on this video. This is for week 2. One other thing that is worth noting, I'm assigning your bonus assignment for this quarter. Wait, Mr. Merrill, giving us a bonus assignment even though we don't see you? Yes. Your bonus assignment information is located in your packet that you'll be picking up for your second week. It does expect you to do a one-page typed paper. Make sure you use the proper font. Make sure you have a proper length. Use good grammar, punctuation. Basically all the things that I expect in other papers that we've done before. And that will be due when we take the Chapter 19 test, probably next week sometime. That will help you raise your lowest quiz grade up to 110%. If you have any questions about it, just please let me know via Skype or email me, and I will be able to help you. All right, let's get started now into this new chapter. This is Chapter 19, as we said before. We're on page 413. First things first, I want you to read the first 3 paragraphs to yourself, and then once you have finished reading those paragraphs, unpause the video and continue with class. All right, let's get started. Roman number 1, independence for some British territories. During the Age of Exploration, Europeans colonized isolated places of the world, America, Australia, South Africa, etc. As the years progressed, these colonists would become more independent of their mother countries, as we saw with the American Revolution. To begin with, let us see the growth of America during the 19th century. Next year, when you take U.S. history, we'll probably spend a good 10 chapters or so covering this segment of U.S. history. Today, we're going to cover it in big letter A, and hopefully in less than 15 minutes. Number 1, geographic and political expansion. After independence was gained, the U.S. continued to expand westward during the 1800s. In 1803, we have the Louisiana Purchase. You can see that on the map on the projector. It's that bluish territory located there. Also, if you look at page 414, it shows you a map of Americans' expansion. The Louisiana Territory is most of the land west of the Mississippi River and east of the Rocky Mountains. The president at the time was Thomas Jefferson. A thing you might want to jot down for Louisiana Purchase, it was bought for $15 million, and we got it from France. Also, it nearly doubled the size of the U.S. Next, in 1848, we have the Mexican Cession. This was a land gained from the Mexican War in the southwest part of the U.S. today. You can see it on the map, the green area there. In 1867, we have the purchase of Alaska. One thing about this you need to know, make sure you know that Alaska was purchased from Russia. There were additional territories, some on the map that you see, Texas, Florida, the Northwest, but also outside the U.S. We have additional territories like Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. These were all done from the Spanish-American War. The U.S. was expanding on a political level too. As the U.S. continued to expand, democratic values began to grow as well. New territories could become new states and receive equal rights and privileges that the original 13 states had. One more thing that we see with political expansion was the concept of universal manhood suffrage. Initially, voting rights were limited to those who owned property, But as westward expansion continued to occur, laws began to change. If you need to write this down, universal manhood suffrage means all men had the right to vote. Women, well, you'll get your turn soon enough, but for universal manhood suffrage, all men had the right to vote. Number 2, growth of industry and population. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, there was a major boom in industry and population in the U.S. So let's begin with industry. Letter A, hardworking American spirit. Most Americans still believe that by working hard, you could succeed in life. Letter B, there's abundance of raw materials. There was gold, silver, steel, copper, etc., etc. We have new inventions. For example, the telegraph, the telephone, and the light bulb. Letter D, we have the expansion of the railroads. For example, the Transcontinental Railroad would link the east to the west. Letter E, we experience many great spiritual revivals in America. For example, in the early 1800s, there was the Second Great Awakening. By the mid-1800s, we have the prayer meeting revival taking place. God blessed America with revivals. That was all under industry. Now under population, real quickly, there was an immigration boom and there was a baby boom. In 1790, the population of the U.S. was 4 million. By 1910, it would be 99 million. 1/3 of the new citizens were primarily European immigrants who came to settle in America. Most of these immigrants settled in the major cities and became the backbone of industry. Also, with the concept of the baby boom, the simple fact was many families had many children, hence a baby boom. Number 3, isolation in foreign affairs. In 1823, the U.S. had what was called the Monroe Doctrine. What you need to write down about it is it was a policy of neutrality and isolation from the rest of the world. The U.S. cared more about national security and trade than they did about becoming entangled in European alliances and wars. Big letter B, British colonies granted independence. During the 1800s, while Spain was losing its colonies, we talked about that in a previous chapter, Britain was gaining new colonies. Britain had the largest empire in the world. In fact, it could be said that the British Empire was the empire where the sun never sets. This map shows you in red all of the territories, all of the colonies that Britain controlled at this time period. As you can see, literally the sun was somewhere shining over the British Empire. If you look at page 416, it shows you another map similar to this one of the British Empire. Colonies will enjoy greater self-government. Having learned from the failures of the American Revolution, Britain realized that self-government would be the best way to avoid another war. Most of Britain's colonies would gain national independence without experiencing widespread revolts. Let's talk about a few key examples of British colonies. Number 1, Canada. Who possessed Canada before the British did? Yeah, you'd be right. France. After the 7 Years' War, Britain had to find a way to maintain peace between its English and French colonists in Canada. The solution was the Quebec Act of 1774. The thing you need to know about the Quebec Act is it permitted French Canadians the right to retain their language, law, customs, and Catholicism. While the Protestant American colonists were angered by this law, it pleased the Canadian colonists. One more piece of legislation passed in Canada was in 1867, the British North America Act. In short, this act created the Dominion of Canada. It created Canada. Although technically still a part of the British Empire, Canada had a much greater degree of self-government than before. Number 2, Australia and New Zealand. Australia is an island continent a little smaller than the U.S. The Dutch discovered it in the early 1600s, but the British would be first to colonize it in the late 1700s. The main man responsible for putting Australia on the map was James Cook. Thing you need to know about him is his exploration laid the basis for British claims to the area. His exploration laid the basis for British claims to the area. He explored the eastern coast of Australia, to be specific. Australia became known as a convict colony. When the American Revolution broke out, Britain no longer had a place to send its criminals from its overcrowded prisons. They had been sent to Georgia. Well, to fix the problem, they began sending the prisoners to Port Jackson. Now we call it Sydney, Australia. The first settlers were mostly convicts and the soldiers sent to supervise them. But Australia grew thanks to the discovery of gold and the promise of cheap land. More colonists than just criminals began to settle in Australia as land was cheap and gold was discovered there. And in 1901, it became known as the Commonwealth of Australia, united the colonies into one, giving Australia self-rule in the British Empire. In your notes, maybe if you want to draw a line connecting these facts, but all of these facts that we mentioned here have to do with Australia. The next couple notes will have to do with New Zealand, so if you want to do that, that works for me. The Maoris, these are native New Zealanders. Native New Zealanders. They enjoyed a better situation than many colonized peoples, and in 1907, New Zealand was given self-government in the British Empire as well. In 1947, New Zealand became its own sovereign nation. Lastly, let's talk about South Africa. South Africa was originally colonized by the Dutch. The Dutch established Cape Colony in 1652. The Dutch eventually became known as Boers. That word means farmers in Dutch. The British showed up in the early 1800s. Well, when the British showed up, of course, the Boers decided to move. The Boers who disliked British rule moved inland. The Great Trek is the name for the massive migration northward and inland by the Boers. So you can see, of course, Cape of Good Hope, Cape Town would have been down here. The Boers would have moved northward and inland into these areas. For a time, the Boers were granted freedom and peace until diamonds and gold were discovered on their lands. From 1899 to 1902, the Boer War took place. It was a war between the British and the Boers. There were 7,500 British soldiers and 4,000 Boer casualties throughout the whole war. 7,500 British casualties, 4,000 Boer casualties throughout the war. It resulted in a British victory, however, and the Boer land was added to the British territory. But the British treated the Boers graciously and allowed them to retain much of their culture and customs. Lastly, in 1910, the Union of South Africa united all of this area into one territory within the British Empire. South Africa became a dominion in 1931 and wouldn't gain its independence until 1961. That's all we're going to cover for today. In your packet, along with the bonus information given to you, is also your first quiz for this chapter. It's pages 413 to 418. If you have any questions, please Skype, please email me. Let me know if you have any questions. Hope you all have a good rest of the day. Be good, do good. Bye.